We begin the debate now on BBC One with David Dimbleby.
Tonight we're in Grimsby and this is Question Time. And a big welcome to you listening, watching, to our audience here, of course, as ever, and to our panel. Tonight, the Conservative MP Nadhim Zahawi, founder, former chief executive of the polling company YouGov, Labour's former Home Secretary, Alan Johnson, the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage, the businesswoman and winner of the Apprentice, Michelle Dewberry, and the writer and academic, Germaine Greer. Good. Thank you very much indeed. And as ever, if you want to join in this debate, you can text or tweet our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981 and press the red button to see what others are saying. Let's have our first question, which comes from Tracy Coggan, please.
Is this government willing to intervene and rescue the UK steel industry?
Is this government willing to intervene and rescue the UK steel industry? And we are, of course, close to the steel industry that has just had losses of over, I think, a quarter of its staff in North Lincolnshire. Alan Johnson, you start on this.
They could be doing much, much more, that's for sure. The people in Scunthorpe, people in Redcar, people in Lanarkshire. This is a strategic industry for any country, a foundation industry. You need to have a steel industry, and it goes through cycles, and sometimes demand is up, sometimes demand is down. But if you lose your steel industry altogether, you lose a vital part of manufacturing. Now, there's three things the government should be doing, in my view. One is to look at business rates. Two is to look at energy costs. Three is to do more through the EU and the World Trade Organization to deal with dumping. Dumping is selling steel at below the cost that it took to make it. And China's not the only one dumping on the international market. Other countries are doing this. But China, 10 years ago, joined the World Trade Organization. And actually, dumping is against the rules of the WTO, let alone the rules of the EU. I've seen no action from government to deal with that. And I've seen no real attempt to have a strategy for dealing with this. The announcement the other day by the minister that he's going to give £80 million to help the local communities, that's fine. Actually, about 40 million of that was already going to be given because of statutory redundancy rules. But there's much more governments are doing in Italy and France and Germany to protect their steel industries, and we should be doing that as well.
And could that save it? I mean, in the EU, they say the problem is overproduction of steel across Europe.
Yes.
Those measures can save it?
Well, if you look at what's happened in those other European Union countries, and if you look at what the steel industry was asking for from the government, it was on issues like energy costs and like business rates. But the real issue here is whether we could... So in Redcar, the coke ovens have been closed. That means they'll never resume steel making again. In most cases where there's been a problem like this, they've kept the coke ovens working. A new company just opened in Newport that closed 3 years ago. This week for steel, it's been closed for 3 years, but they kept the coke ovens mothballed. Therefore, they could reopen when demand increased. The real tragedy in Redcar and Teesside, not Scunthorpe, but it's hard enough there, but in Redcar, they will never produce steel again, and the government could have done something about that.
Nadhim Zahawi.
I think Alan Johnson raises an important point about the global steel industry. Steel prices have gone from 2 years ago, $1,600 a tonne. Today it's sub $400. So this isn't just dumping from China, it's the Ukraine, it's India. It's happening because there's overcapacity. What the government has been doing is been working with the industry for many, many years. This isn't something that happened last week or the week before. On energy costs, Alan mentions that quite rightly, the government has already actually paid the industry about £50 million in effectively returning to them the cost of energy. Now,
Well, hang on, that doesn't mean anything, returning the cost of energy. Do you mean do you mean making energy as cheap as it is in Germany or France?
Well, it means that those who use a lot of energy, the government has worked with them to make sure that they actually get a rebate back of £50 million.
But we know the problem. The price of energy, electricity use is 9p a kilowatt, I am told, here in Britain, 4p in France. Have they brought those two together and made it the equivalent of 4p for the British Steel industry?
What they've done already, as I said, is they've given back £50 million.
But how much is that? What's it? I mean, we can't... It's a vague figure. What is £50 million?
We need to bring down the cost of energy, and where Labour could help us is they don't vote for higher energy costs, as they did last week in the House of Lords. But back to what we're doing to help the industry, which is very important. There was a summit last week, cross-party, so the Labour MPs, which constituencies actually have these big steel manufacturers, were there, the unions were there, as well as, of course, the whole of the industry. And there are 3 strands of work. The first is procurement. The government's looking at more procurement. So the Crossrail project, 26 miles, that actually, because of legislation in the last Parliament, they could actually buy British steel. That's one area. The other,
they're allowed to avoid competition rules and say, we will only use British steel?
They're allowed to look at procurement and be able to use British steel. Right. That's the way they did it. We're looking at competitiveness, which you raised, David, i.e. what more can we do to make our industry competitive? And then, of course, what's happening elsewhere in the world. What are other countries doing without breaking state aid rules that we can look at to help the industry? And, of course, the most important bit, which is those people who are being made redundant, we're looking at training of those people, making sure that money does flow to help them get a job. A lot of them, by the way, are actually highly skilled. So the 80 million that Sajid Javid, Secretary of State, has put towards training those people is right, and we'll be doing much more on this to make sure that we...
Just to bring you just briefly to the key question, can this government rescue the UK steel industry? Are you saying now that the steel industry in Britain can continue to thrive after this, that this is just a hiccup?
Well, look...
Is that what you're saying?
In any industry, right, what you get is oversupply, prices come crashing down. Some people were... the example of SSI, where the company simply couldn't keep going any longer. Others, like Tata, who I think will be much more responsible. There'll be, I'm sure, some voluntary redundancies. I don't know whether they're going to go any further than that. I hope not. But essentially, once the supply catches up, or the demand catches up with the supply, you'll see prices rising again. It applies to any commodity around the world. And I think we will end up with having a robust industry in the UK. Alan mentioned the company that's just opened after 3 years. That's because they're specialists. They were niche manufacturing. That's the sort of...
stop them closing 3 years.
All right, Michelle.
Yeah, so we need to be clear. So we're talking a lot about stats and statistics, but I work a lot with people, getting them back into employment, and there's a real human cost in us letting this industry decline. There are huge amounts of people, and the problem that you've got in these towns and cities when you've got monopolised employers, what you have is you've got grandparents, fathers, sons. All they've ever done is work in these plants. And this is a crisis for me. So do I think the government has and is doing enough? No, I don't, actually. I think that this problem has not just suddenly crept upon us. This has not just happened last week. We've known that the market prices of steel have been on decline for quite some time now. We could have stepped in, you know, beforehand.
The government's been working with the industry for years.
Yes,
Michelle.
but it's obviously not working. And if it was working, I'll tell you now, SSI wouldn't have finished. Tata wouldn't be standing there saying, help me. You know, we're about to put job losses out there. And for me, this is... We need to be saying more than we will cap business rates, we will compensate energy. We need to be saying we are doing this and we are doing that and we have done this.
We've done that.
And it needs to be more
50
active.
million in energy rebate.
OK. Let me hear from one or two members of the audience and then I'll come to the other members of the panel. You, sir, in the second row from the back there. No, the man in blue there, yes.
How can we have a northern powerhouse without a steelworks? Where's the money from the sale of British steel, and why can't we buy it back? I'm a local business owner. I work in mechanical engineering, and I believe that I would accept extra £5,000 on the corporation tax if it meant we could gain our steelworks and our mechanical and manufacturing back into British hands, not invested by foreign people who Yes, it's great to have foreign investment, but do they really care about the human impact?
Would you nationalise it? Is that what you're saying?
I would nationalise it, 100%.
Nigel Farage, would you like to see steel nationalised?
I'd like to see steel operating and vibrant. And the answer to the question that Tracy asked, is the government willing to intervene? It can't intervene. Why? Because its hands are tied. Yeah. Yes, of course, commodity prices. I spent 20 years buying and selling metals, and you get oversupply in a market, and in a few years' time, the steel price will recover. That is the argument actually for intervening and for helping out in the short term. But Alan, please, don't tell us we can help Tata Steel just a few miles from here with their business rates. North Lincolnshire County Council tried to do that, and their boss admitted today they are not allowed to relieve the £15 million a year business rates. No. She said it this afternoon. Perhaps you're behind. I don't know.
Yeah. The Conservative leader of...
They cannot provide any rate relief because of EU rules. Sajid Javid was asked the very same question, the business secretary. What could he do to help the steel industry through its short-term mess? He said because of EU state aid rules, absolutely nothing. We have burdened not just the steel industry, but all our heavy manufacturing with huge energy costs. European policy on this has been deeply misguided, and we're seeing heavy industry closing all over Europe. But the Germans aren't stupid, and they do act in their own national interest. And what Merkel has started to do is a massive programme of building coal-fired power stations.
Sorry, are you saying that Germany acts outside the rules of the EU, despite being the most powerful country in the EU?
It's very interesting. The Eggborough power station in Yorkshire closed last year. Ferry Bridge is about to close. Kings North in Kent closed last year. We're told because of EU rules, if you drive from Belgium into Germany, you will see they are constructing and now burning coal on a huge scale.
Well, therefore, sorry to interrupt. You're saying it's perfectly feasible within the EU
because they've managed
to do these things.
They've managed to get round the rules.
They don't need to leave the EU.
They've managed to get round the rules. They've managed to get round the rules. For some reason, we haven't. We have got energy, which British industry is now, because of George Osborne, bringing in a carbon floor and deciding that we would subsidise rich landowners to put wind turbines on their land. We have now got energy costs that are double the rest of the EU, and this isn't. Okay. This isn't. Just one more point. This isn't just about steel. In the last 8 years, we've lost 40,000 jobs in the aluminium industry, 60,000 jobs in steel, 10,000 jobs in refining. We've lost jobs in glass. We've lost jobs in cement. We're destroying British heavy industry. It is madness.
Okay. Germaine Greer. And I'll come to you in the audience just a minute.
The odd thing about this is that I'm Australian, and we don't have a steel industry. We produce the highest grade ore, iron ore, in the world, and we have one customer, and our customer is China. And China's economy overheated. China ends up with a stockpile of steel, and it's interesting that China is now being accused of dumping when, in fact, I seem to remember a time when everyone was very enthusiastic about globalisation, which meant that if people could produce things cheaper, we wanted to buy the cheaper goods, and if that meant we mothballed our own industries, then that's what we did. And now we're whinging and complaining, and I really don't see that we should all now decide to produce steel which is actually uneconomic. That's a bad idea, and it won't work. Until the stockpile is used, it will continue to undercut us, and we will continue to call it dumping when in fact it's just marketing. I don't approve of globalisation. I think it's been a disastrous policy for, in particular, the developing nations. But we accepted it. Everyone was very excited about it. And now we're whinging and complaining that it's begun to bite. Our workers are expensive. Other people's workers are cheap. And globalisation meant that meant we were uncompetitive.
Okay.
There is a way around that, which has already been adumbrated, which is that we should produce a higher grade product. We should actually improve the standards so that we were producing steel for specific applications. We can't just sit around and think that we're going to be just doing girders like everybody else. Now, other people are going to say, well, we're already doing these higher grade products. Well, what we've got to do is learn to market them. You can't just sit around whinging that other people are outselling them.
OK, now, hold on, Nigel. No. I'll go to you. No, Nigel, hold on.
We must help our industries with energy.
The man there with spectacles and a blue shirt on, you.
Thank you. I've got 4 children. If it turns out that one or more of them isn't academic, what should I advise them to do with the death of manufacturing in this country? My dad made cars, his dad was a printer, and his dad made watches, but what will there be to do for my children if they're academic? I'm a teacher, so I am academic, fortunately.
OK, and you sir at the back there, the second row from the back.
I was a steelworker during the strike of 79-80, and with all due respect to the panel, we heard a lot of the same rhetoric then. What I think that they failed to understand, we talk about spending the £80 million retraining people. To do what? When British steelworks closed, it's not just the steelworkers that are affected. I know they're the focus of the attention at the moment, but it's the shop round the corner won't have any customers, the pub up the road won't have any customers, the travel agent won't have any customers. You will constrict the economic breath out of that town. And we in Grimsby know, because it happened to us with the fishing industry. We've been through this. You don't understand what you're going to do to that town by not stepping in with real help. Not just lip service and training them all to be telephone sanitisation engineers or whatever. They need real help, not lip service, and you're not offering that.
You said you were a steel worker, yes?
Yes, I worked before I went to university.
How did you retrain?
I did the job for a year while I was waiting to go to university, so I already had something to go on to.
OK. And you, sir, up there. Yes, I'll come to you in a second, Michelle. Yes, you in the bow tie.
It's nice to hear people talking about energy costs. Mr Farage and other people mentioned about energy costs. While we were throwing loads of money at subsidies for wind farms and so on, France was building nuclear power stations, left, right and centre, and now their costs of energy are about half of what ours are. It's a good point there.
Alan Johnson, what do you make of that point? Do you think our energy policy under Labour as well as under the coalition is just wrong?
France are going to be building out nuclear power stations as well.
Why weren't we building them? Why didn't we build them?
We should have.
Didn't we build the first nuclear power station in the world?
Yeah, we should have been rebuilt. We should have been renewing our nuclear power stations much earlier. There's absolutely no question of that. Listen, can I come to Nigel? Every issue I think we discussed today, the problem will be Europe.
Well, it is.
Well, no, it's not.
Well,
no, it's not.
Why won't you admit it?
No, it's not. Because it's not.
Why won't you admit it?
Because it's not, Nigel. Here's the basic problem here. The basic problem. First of all, Nigel says state aid rules. State aid rules we signed up to, incidentally, as part of the. No, of course you didn't. But as much to protect British industries. They don't say that state aid is demand. They say that state aid has to be regulated. There are reasons why you can get state aid that other European countries have taken advantage of. At Redcar, they've actually got carbon capture and storage. They've got research and development, which could have meant that they would have got state aid. Nobody applied for state aid for Redcar. The other issue is, the problem is dumping. If every Scunthorpe steelworker worked for nothing, they would still not be able to provide steel as cheap as they're providing it in China. And the issue here is how best can we deal with that international problem. Chinese president was over here this week. He says that Chinese steelworks have closed because they're over capacity. No one can find any evidence of that. But the only way to deal with that effectively is internationally. Through the European Union, 500 million together, and through the World Trade Organization. Do you think, Nigel, seriously, that if Britain was on its own, that there would not be dumping on our market from China and we would be less able to deal with it, not more able to deal with it?
Leaving aside... If we were in control of our own trade policy and we had our own trade deal with China, if we thought China was behaving unfairly, we could put tariffs on their steel. As members of the European Union, we cannot do that.
All right, I just want to bring... I want to come back
to energy at some point,
I want to come back to... Yeah, I want to come back to a point you made about Germany. Do you accept his point that the German steel industry is doing better?
No, because
in
Nigel,
all kinds of ways and not losing...
Nigel doesn't
losing
understand
workers.
what's happening in Germany. I'm
really?
chemical... I tell you what, I'm going to explain to you.
well, aren't we lucky to have you on tonight?
Just
My
hold
goodness
on.
me.
Hold on, Nigel. Germany decided, after Fukushima, to close down all their nuclear power stations. Right? They realised, actually, solar and wind is not enough because you need a base level of power. That is why they're having to invest very rapidly to deliver that base level of power. That's a whole other thing. I want to go back to the gentleman at the back who talked about what other jobs are out there. Now, I told you I'm a chemical engineer, right? I believe in engineering in our country. In my constituency, we've got Jaguar Land Rover, we've got other automotive sectors. We produce a car every 20 seconds in the UK. We export those cars all over Europe to the rest of the world.
What's this got to do with the steel
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you in a second
that
we have got manufacturing in this country thriving. If the steel industry will actually survive and will continue to thrive in the UK because of the support that the government will offer it, the support that I've already talked about, procurement.
That needs to happen very quickly, though.
I don't disagree with you.
But you're saying it will survive, but what you're saying is it's not surviving.
No.
It's not surviving.
What you're seeing...
They're closing.
Well, some are closing, others... Tata is not closing.
No,
right?
but
they're having to scale back.
1 in 6 now.
Because
1 in 6 jobs are at risk in this sector.
I don't disagree with you.
They are.
But this is a crisis in the steel industry because of oversupply
it's not.
globally.
No, the steel industry is a symptom of what is happening to heavy manufacturing in Britain. As I told you, our aluminium industries, our cement industries, our refining industries, they're being destroyed because we're giving them energy that is simply too expensive. And what I'm asking for is to give British heavy industries a level playing field, and then we can compete.
Then
we can succeed.
I want to go to you, sir.
I believe it's a matter of public knowledge that the Prime Minister has local connections to Scunthorpe. Perhaps he should take a leaf out of Lord Tebbett's book and get on his bike, which is hopefully made of British steel, get up to Scunthorpe. I believe he may have a slow puncture because there's a community up there that need his support. I've yet to see a local politician or a national politician come out in support of the people of Scunthorpe, and it's diabolical that they haven't.
And I'd like to go back to I'd like to go back to Tracy, who put the original question. What do you make of what you've heard so far, and what's your view?
I just hear ifs, whens, buts. When's it actually going to happen? You know, by the time we've all debated what potentially we could do, we may be shut. I work actually at Tata, which is at Scunthorpe, and I can see this every day. You know, I work with these people, the 900 at Scunthorpe, they're potentially going to, well, they will be losing their job. I also work with, alongside the people up near Glasgow that will be losing their job. It's 1,200 people. It's just heartbreaking.
It is. And what we need to do, by the way, is we need to try and prevent these situations from happening. We need to try and move away from monopolised employments where you've got whole communities, towns, cities that are wholly dependent on one massive employer. Government needs to be sitting there now and looking at where are the risk areas, where do we need to be encouraging more enterprise into, which cities, which towns, what can we do to stimulate those economies?
The North East is the fastest area in terms of job creation in our country. The North West is exporting more than the rest of the UK. So we've got some good things that are happening.
I'll bring you in a moment. Go on. You have to convince him.
Well,
he's shaking his head as you speak.
That's the data. That's the facts. That is the reality on the ground. The fastest job creation is in the North. It's not London. It's not London.
But is it because it's the fastest loss of jobs?
No, because we've been backing entrepreneurs, backing business, reducing corporation tax down to 19%, coming further down. That's why. You create an environment for people to build businesses, you get businesses started.
Okay.
You get people investing.
Facts can be made to suit anything.
What's that?
You can pick a fact out of the air and it can be made to suit your argument. The fact is, we're very quick to privatise a bank when it's going to go under, but not manufacturing industry. For 1/3 of what you gave to the banks, for 1/3 of what we gave to the banks, we could have kept steel going for the next 50, 60 years.
OK. I'm going to move on. We'll come... We've got... I'm sorry. I'll go on then, quickly. Yeah, the man in the middle in brown there. Can you go to him? Yes.
If we sat there listening to you, everything's all rosy, it's fine. You're saying, you know, the price of steel is going to go back up, everything's fine soon, and we're scaling back. These are real people who've lost their jobs here and now. This is what we're talking about, not soon it'll be okay. Like David said, once Redcar's shut, it's shut. It's never opening again, that's it. End of. Yeah. But we're just talking about what will happen soon. This is the here and now and real people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agree.
Thank you. Right, we've got inevitably many other questions.
Not all steel workers are manual labourers. I have got an education behind me. We have lots of very highly educated people who I work with. At the present moment, I see my only option is I'm going to up sticks, leave the area and go and work in the nuclear industry. Because that's where the jobs are, because that seems to be the only thing that we see in the newspaper.
For the Chinese?
For the Chinese.
Well, we'll come to it. And the French. All right, thank you very much. Well, now, just before we go to the next question, I should just give our destinations in the next couple of weeks. Edinburgh next week, Tottenham in North London the week after that. On the screen are the details of how to apply. I'll give those later on in the programme. But let's go to China in that case. Mel Ogden, please, has a question. Mel Ogden.
Should the UK be sucking up to a rogue nation just for financial gain?
Germaine Greer.
Well, it's very good of the Chinese, I would have thought, to have agreed not to mention the fact that we used to be the principal drug traffickers to China. We used to sell them opium.
We did.
And here we are going to take the moral high ground and wag our fingers at them and tell them that their behaviour does not satisfy us. It is not simply a matter of wanting Chinese money. It's really interesting. We neglected the nuclear industry for 50 years, and now we're paying for it. And you've already heard this evening that French energy costs are much lower than ours, partly because they developed their nuclear power plants. So now we've decided, well, perhaps we will do that, and we'll do it on British shores, and we'll do it with Chinese cooperation, Chinese whatever it is. I don't quite understand exactly how it's going to pan out. But the interesting thing to me is the Chinese know they have no future without nuclear energy. It's arguable that the world has no future without nuclear energy. We can't keep on deforesting the Himalaya because the forests are all gone. And there will be no modernisation of the developing world without cheap energy. It's a problem that has to be addressed. It should have been addressed 50 years ago. Now it's going to be addressed. But the Chinese are not going to build nuclear plants in the ring of fire around the Pacific. We've already found out what that could lead to, because this is the most unstable part of the globe. So they're going to build them here. Now, you may say, we shouldn't have to do that. That's not fair, because nuclear power is dangerous. We've used up the fossil fuels. We're going to have to actually go to the next phase in generating cheap energy for the rest of the world to modernise. And we're late doing it, and it's going to be tough, and things are going to go wrong, and the price is going to be high, and already we don't know exactly how it's going to be financed, but it won't be entirely financed by China.
But having 30 billion of Chinese money invested in Britain as a result of this visit, you in favour of that?
We're very good at losing it. I'm in favour of it, yes.
You are in favour.
If the Chinese want to invest, let them invest. Goodness knows. I mean, just have a look at what you're wearing tonight. Just have a look and see where it was made. I mean, most of the stuff we've got on us is made in China.
I don't want to...
The Chinese... the Chinese
too
make...
close an examination.
The Chinese make two sorts of products. They make rubbish and they make wonderful things. And most of what we buy is rubbish, which is our fault.
Okay.
We should be in a proper grown-up trade relationship with this country, and I think we should stop going on about dumping. And what we're saying is that we're not competitive.
Well, what Mel said was sucking up to a rogue nation. What did you mean, actually, Mel?
Well, we appear to have selective integrity here, because a week ago with Saudi Arabia it was a little bit different. We withdrew a contract from them with their human rights records. Chinese human rights records and treatment of neighbours leaves a little bit to be desired.
This was the prison contract, yes. Nigel Farage.
I've been wondering where Davey gets his ties made for a long time, and I think perhaps we've got the answer, you know. I mean, look, I want us, Mel, I want us to have a sensible, grown-up trade relationship with China, but one on terms that we can dictate, and that was the point I was making earlier. You know, often we're told Britain isn't big enough in the world to have its own trade deals. Well, the Icelandics, who've got 300,000 people, have got their own trade deal with China. That's what we should have. However, there are limits, I think, to how far this relationship should go. And I think the sucking up to China has been over this Hinkley Point nuclear power station deal, where for £6 billion sterling's worth of investment, what the Chancellor of the Exchequer has given them is a guaranteed strike price, inflation adjusted, at double the current price, double the current exorbitant price of energy at the moment for 35 years. He did not need to give away such a shed load of British taxpayers' money and to virtually guarantee that we're going to keep energy prices, which you talked about earlier this programme, so high. That was a mistake, and I also think that perhaps to allow, you called them a rogue state, but whichever way we look at it, there are some very deep questions to ask about the way China operates and perhaps some of its motives. I actually think to allow a country like China to be such a key player in something as sensitive as the nuclear industry actually brings up some quite serious security concerns as well.
You, sir, there.
Mr. Farage seems to believe that a nuclear-based attack from China would be in any way viable for any state involved.
No,
in it.
I don't believe that. What I believe is there are some things that should be secrets for countries, and anything to do with the nuclear industry, for obvious reasons, is something that needs to be a pretty closely guarded secret, or if we're going to share it, we share it with our absolute closest allies on Earth, and that I don't think can ever be China.
Nadhim, sorry, let me bring Nadhim in. Let me just repeat the question, because we're getting a bit far away from it. Should the UK be sucking up, do you accept that as a definition of what happened this week, to a rogue nation? Do you accept that, just for financial gain?
Well, I mean, the gist of the question is, you know, how do we treat countries like China or Saudi Arabia, for that matter? And the government has to strike a balance. Now, I sit on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I can tell you, you know, we hold the FCO, the Foreign Office, to account that none of our ambassadors, none of our ministers, not our Prime Minister, shies away from dealing with the tough questions about human rights or whatever it happens to be with any country. Part of what we do is we go out and talk about the rule of law and our values, and those things are there on the table all the time. In terms of the relationship with China, I am very, very supportive, because that 30 billion of investment is about 25,000 jobs. Michelle was just talking about diversification, more investment. That sort of investment, that's 25,000 families. That's 25,000 families with a secure pay packet at the end of the month. That is important. That is why we want these countries to come and invest it, not just China. We've got Narendra Modi coming over from India. We've got other countries who are looking to come and trade with the UK, to share knowledge with the UK. Now, as far as Nigel's scaremongering goes, two areas. One, his talk of an Icelandic deal with China. That trade agreement is a one-way agreement. China basically drafts it, Iceland signs it. It's very different to the deals that Europe can strike with China. That is the difference. You know, we can talk about Europe later, but he should not mislead the audience by saying as if Iceland can actually sit with China on a level playing field.
Okay, what about the rogue nation? You said something very interesting at the beginning. You said, I sit on this Foreign Affairs Committee, and I can promise you the Foreign Office always has human rights on the table. With what effect?
Well, with, I think, a significant effect in the countries. Bahrain, let me give you an example. When Bahrain had their problems with the protests, Bahrainis actually said, look, can you send us some experts? Can you send police over? Can you help us? We actually delivered a report to them that made them change the way they do their policing. These sort of things are good, but we have to strike a balance, and the Prime Minister had to strike that balance. But let me come back to one more point that Nigel talked about, which is the nuclear power station and trusting the Chinese. This isn't taken lightly. Our security agencies are involved. There are checks and balances all the way through. We've done it in telecommunications with Huawei, another group, and GCHQ actually look at all of that. and have real control over what the Chinese can see and can't see. So we don't enter these deals lightly. We do them for the right reasons, for UK jobs.
Michelle Dewberry.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think no one can dispute the human rights aspect of what China do. So they apparently have more death penalties than the rest of the world combined. And, you know, they're imprisoning people for daring to campaign against domestic violence. You know, they have an appalling track record. But I also feel quite strongly that actually you can be in a position to influence better change by being in a partnership with somebody. So we've just spent 5 minutes previously talking about how China has become has gone from being the biggest consumer in the steel industry to one of the biggest competitors of the or one of the biggest threats to the steel industry. And I do feel that by working closer with China, we'll be able to influence much more change. We'll also be able to, as we've just been talking about Hinkley Point C and the 25,000 jobs that are created, we need foreign investment. We need job creation, and actually, quite frankly, I think that we're better to have these people on our side and be in partnerships and trying to influence change from within, rather than standing on the sidelines, trying to tout them all high ground, saying, we don't want your money because you do this, this and this.
OK. And the man at the back there. Yes, yes.
I just wonder how the Conservative government could scrutinise the likes of China for their human rights violations when they're being investigated themselves. The Department of Work and Pensions, Ian Duncan-Smith, for his treatment of disabled people, and the tax cuts and their austerity measures, which is hurting their own people in this country to such an extent. How can you then go and scrutinise another country when you're doing it yourself?
You equate the two. Alan Johnson, what do you think about that?
Well, I've been waiting for a long time to find out what Nigel's vision for Britain outside Europe is. It now seems it's Iceland, which is a country, incidentally, that applies virtually every European rule and has free movement. Now, on the issue, I wouldn't make this a pejorative point about China. I think it's right that we trade with China. It is the second biggest economy in the world and will soon be the biggest economy. The worst situation for the world and for us is China in isolation. The fact that they've opened up to the rest of the world means actually 600 million people, human beings, lifted out of poverty in that country. And I think we can influence them further in terms of the trade. The security question, I don't think applies. They are building nuclear power stations in America, by the way, on the same basis. And if we have a problem with China about nuclear energy or some kind of combat with China, believe me, our energy will be the least of our problems. So I think it's right to deal with China. It's right to have two-way trade. I led a delegation to China when I was Trade and Industry Secretary 10 years ago. It's nothing new. But I think at the same time, we use that influence to try to change their human rights record. If we only dealt with perfect countries in the world on human rights, we'd be dealing with Vatican City in Rome. There'd be no one else to actually trade with.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was a good example, was it?
I'm not
sure. But just answer the man in the check shirt who said...
Sorry, I just think that you just completely avoided the question there. We didn't really...
Oh, sorry, I was taking the question, the original question, yeah.
We didn't really go into, you know, who are we to tell other countries when we're doing so much wrong ourselves?
Yes. Well, I think your criticism is absolutely right of this government. I wouldn't equate it with Tiananmen Square and some of the things...
All right, let's go to...
But there is something we need to remember. We're terribly good at forgetting that China pulled off the most extraordinary coup, i.e., it actually rescued its enormous country from famine. Famine is a reality in China within people's lifetime. And it's one of the reasons for their paranoia and their jitteriness about having the status quo overturned, because it's not exactly stable at the moment. I mean, we're friends with America. What about Guantanamo? What about the death sentence in America? Does anyone ever say anything? No. Yes, it's China, and you should see what the tabloids have been running this week. The ridiculous, xenophobic nonsense about China. They've been accusing China of all kinds of weird things, so that when Prince William met the 7-foot man, they said they did it on purpose to make him look small. At this point, you think, oh, please, they're grown-ups, and they have been through more in the 20th century than we have been through in 600 years. Somebody has to understand that freedom from hunger is a genuine freedom. And when you're talking about civil liberties, you're not going to jeopardise that freedom for another one which hardly means anything in historic terms. China is an astonishing country, and we should at least respect them. We don't have to like them, we don't have to approve of them, but one of the things that was very obvious to me reading the tabloid press yesterday is that we don't respect them. That is going to cause us problems because they're not stupid and they're not going to work with us if we're constantly finding them in the wrong and belittling them. They're aware of all this.
Okay. They did, on the other hand, get a golden coach and the Queen and 4 horses taking them down the Mall, and that might perhaps counterbalance what the tabloids said.
Well, it means that the Queen's manners are better than the tabloid press.
Paul Walker, a question from you, please.
That is true.
Paul Walker, please.
Does the cut in working tax credits signal the death of compassionate Conservatives?
The cut in working tax credits...
When were they allowed?
This question's based on a Conservative MP whose maiden speech this week. She said that we're betraying who we are with these working tax credits. Obviously, I'll come to you in a moment. Nigel Farage, your reaction?
I'm afraid the bottom of the pile for the last decade have been people working, earning low salaries. They've had a miserable decade. They are worse off, very many of them, than they were 10 years ago. There are lots of reasons for that, chiefly massive oversupply of labour, driving, the price of wages down. And I think that for nearly 3 million of them, in the middle of next year, to get a further kick in the teeth of over £1,000 a year, frankly, it's pretty heartless, so there isn't much compassionate conservatism in that. I think that any changes that happen to tax credits that are supposed to be counterbalanced by increases in the minimum wage. I think Frank Field has got a motion before Parliament in a few days' time to say that one should directly coincide with the other. That's the minimum. What I would actually like to see in the short term is people on lower wages earning a bit more money and feeling their standards of living not being depressed but rising.
Look, when we took office, we came into a government that had a country on low wages, very high taxes and very high welfare. What the Chancellor is delivering, and I absolutely believe in this, and this is where the compassion is high wages. We're going to have a national minimum wage, lower welfare, I should say, and low taxation. If you earn £10,000 a year, you don't pay tax at all. That will rise to £12,500. You get 30 hours of free childcare. You've got £2,000 in tax-free childcare. So taken as a whole, I would much rather live in a country that is creating jobs. We are a jobs factory in this country. We created 2 million jobs in the last Parliament. We're going to create 2 million jobs in this Parliament, 3 million apprenticeships in this Parliament. The way you help people is by giving them better wages. Now, you don't have to believe me, but ask Alistair Darling. Alistair Darling, no, fair enough. Alistair Darling is on record as saying that the tax credit system spiralled out of control, got to £30 billion. It would have gone even further if the last government hadn't made the changes it made. 9 out of 10 people, families with children, were eligible for tax credits. We brought that down to 6 out of 10. What we're proposing now is 5 out of 10 people will be able to have it. Alistair Darling said the tax credit system was actually having a downward pressure on wages. But a lot of employers, David, were using it as an excuse to keep wages low. You've already, since the Chancellor announced the national living wage for our country, loads of Lidl, Morrison's, Aldi, IKEA have all come out and said, we're going to pay much higher wages. That is how you create an economy that is a one-nation country.
One of your own former ministers, David Willits, now heads an organisation called the Resolution Foundation. You know about it. And they've produced a thing today saying that even if you raise the minimum wage next year to the full £9.35 it's going to be in 2020, And even if you combine the minimum wage and raise the income tax threshold, the other thing, families would still be losing money. In other words, if you did all these things now, people would still be losing money. Is he right or is he wrong?
Well, I think my conclusion is if you take the overall effect, including what would happen, as I've just explained, with businesses actually saying, you know what, we're going to go further. Because what government does, what the Chancellor does, is effectively set the mood, the temperature of the country. We want a high-wage, lower welfare and low-tax economy. There's lots of different... So a family with 2 children, 1 person working
you go into all those
on minimum wage, right, will be... You know, 4,000.
But you know the average. You know what the Institute for Fiscal Studies said. The average loss is 1,350 a year. Just one question, then I'll come to Alan Johnson. Is there any chance of the Chancellor or the Treasury reconsidering this? Are they looking? There's obviously a lot of pressure on about it. Are they looking at the possibility of softening the changes, softening the blow?
I think if you look at this in its totality, what the Chancellor has actually done will create a country that has people on higher wages and a much fairer
So the answer's no.
country. Look, no. Well, I mean, of course. Let me just come in here. Let me just come in here very, very briefly. Of course, other people would attack us for doing this, but ultimately, you have to make a choice. Where are you going to find the £4.4 billion that we will save from changing the tax credit system? Are you going to start cutting nurses and doctors in the NHS? Or are you going to cut schools? Or are you going to raise taxes on people? You've got to find £4.4 billion.
All right.
Where are you going to find it?
Alan Johnson, where would you find it?
Well, I don't think this denotes the death of conservatism. I think that compassionate conservatism. I think that happened much earlier with the bedroom tax and some of the measures that were introduced previously. This is a big problem for you because David Cameron said on live television during the election debate, his actual words is let me get rid of this myth. We will not reduce tax credits. When Osborne announced this... When Osborne announced this, we had all this... Nadhim's a nice guy, but he's coming out with Conservative Central Office briefing. He said all this. He said, look, don't worry.
It was Alistair Darling.
He said by 2020, when the minimum wage goes up to £9, everyone will be fine. And then he said 8 out of 10 people are benefiting from this. Let me tell you, those 8 were me, David, the Prime Minister, Osborne. The 2 were the people on working tax credits, because they're the people who are going to lose out. And there is no excuse. There is no excuse for this. You can make all of the arguments about needing to rein in tax credits. Of course you can. Incidentally, you can get your £4.1 billion by not reducing taxes for high earners, by not changing the inheritance tax rules, which affect a tiny number of high earners. On your issue about changing the personal allowance, that benefits all of us. The poorest don't pay tax in the first place. You could change that as well. What you can't excuse is introducing this immediately so that families from April next year lose £1,300 per year. They are working. They are low-paid workers.
Do you think they'll change?
I think it is almost bound to change, or...
You think they will change?
I think they will change. I think the pressure will come. He's doing it through... He's not even putting it through the finance bill, by the way. He's putting it through a statutory instrument. I will be very surprised if the Lords don't amend that next week. You know, given all the constitutional stuff around it, I think they'll amend it. I think the pressure is going to be very high. Listen, one point, we did something with a 10p tax rate, you might remember, when we were in government, that affected the lower paid. And in the end, we rectified it. The maximum loss from that was £232. Nowhere near this £1,300. We felt the hot heat of the public, by the way. And I think, mate, you take some credit for your programme last week and that woman who spoke very passionately, having been affected by this. So I think there are ways to do this. Frank Fields put that forward. You need to ensure that even if you are going to introduce this change eventually, you don't introduce that dramatic reduction in working families' wages from next April.
Right. The woman there. And I'll go to you at the back there, and then I'll go to 2 panellists. I want to get one more question in if I can tonight. Yes, madam.
I'm a head teacher, and I think that many of my families have working tax credit. Many of my staff get working tax credit. And I think one of the biggest problems in this country is that politicians have never been poor. They do not know what life is like for the ordinary people because they live for
And the woman just in front of you. Yes.
Myself.
Yes.
Sir, you speak about creation of jobs. Tata Steel is now finished. Hinkley Point. Are we going to see a British company building Hinkley Point with British workers? Is that going to be the creation of the jobs?
All right, well, that's slightly... We've been through that bit. We're on to tax credits, so let's stick with that, because we've only got a few minutes left. The woman at the very back there. Sorry to stop you on it, but yeah.
I just don't, me personally, I don't think there's any such thing as a compassionate Conservative. You don't care about the poor, you don't care about the vulnerable, you don't care about the disabled, you don't care about young people or students, the way you've absolutely screwed us in every single way possible. The Conservatives will die out, and I hope sooner than later.
They didn't show much sign of dying out at the general election, did they?
23-point-something% of the electorate, so...
All right, Michelle Dewberry.
I think to the last lady's point there, I think that the Tories do need to be quite careful here, because I think that we're in a situation where I agree in principle, by the way, in terms of changing this working tax credit, because the tax credit, it has in lots of ways become a subsidy for low wages, and I think that's wrong. So in principle, I agree in terms of we shouldn't be topping up employers wanting to pay low wages. But I think that the way we're going about this is wrong. I think that people are going, the government is proposing going too fast, too quick. I think the House of Lords is going to step in and is going to table some motions that's going to try and delay things, slow things down. And I think to your point there, I agree with you. I think the Tories perceptionally have it's a perception that you stand just for the posh. You don't really care about people that are, let me finish my point, you don't really care about people that are striving and working, and you say that you are the party for the workers and the strivers and those with the ambition, but when you come out with things that feel like they're knocking the poll, whether they do or not, the perception is that you're going against them.
Germaine Greer, and I'll bring you in at the end.
Look,
briefly, if you would.
The system we have is enormously ungainly. It's expensive to manage. I can never understand why you don't just pay people. Why have you got all these low-paid people? Instead of having this ridiculous system where you pay them too little and then give them a tax credit, which they've got to spend a lot of energy and enterprise to actually get hold of, just pay them.
All right. Well, very brief. So
I am very proud that it's a Conservative Chancellor who has introduced the national living wage for our country. And I just want to come back. I just want to come back on the lady. I just want to come back on the lady who said that politicians don't seem to understand poor people. I am self-made. Let me tell you something about my background. When I was about to go to university, my father lost everything. The bank took our home. We lived on income support and housing benefit and handouts from friends. So I will not take any lectures from anyone about knowing what it's like to be poor. I've been there, so I know what it's like. And my party today, with the 2015 intake and the 2010 intake, is more representative of our country, I would say to you, than any other party in Parliament. So it's not fair.
All right. I'm going to take one last question. We've got 4 or 5 minutes. I'm going to take this question from Claire Ward, please.
Is sugar tax the answer to the NHS obesity difficulties?
Right, we have to be brief on this, but today, at last, the government published a report from Public Health England recommending a sugar tax of between 10 and 20%. Should we go ahead with it? Well, you've just been speaking, so Michelle, I'll come to you first. Be quick, everybody, please. You in favour of a sugar tax?
I'm in favour of better education and better personal responsibility, which would make you stop and sit there and say, I don't want to harm myself and I certainly don't want to harm my children. However, that doesn't seem to be happening. It's something like 1/3 of children leaving primary school are overweight, so the education piece is not working. So am I in favour of tax to try and stop these people pumping their kids full of sugar? Yes, let's try it.
OK. Germaine?
It didn't work with cigarettes. Why would it work with sugar?
Okay. You might know about this now.
I'm paying lots of sin taxes already. whether my can of ginger beer that I like costs 65p or 75p makes no difference. Learning...
Not to you, but it might to some people.
But learning in the last year that it contains 12 teaspoons of sugar has shocked the life out of me, and I'm not buying it anymore. Education, not tax, is the answer.
Okay. Nadhim, what do you think? No, hold on a second.
It's just that you get chemicals like monosodium glutamate in products in food. So why is sugar being singled out? It seems that everything's being taxed, even things which seem a bit unhealthy. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. These things should not be taxed. I cannot believe that thing. You get all these additives. And so why is sugar being singled out?
Well, obesity is costing the NHS £6 billion a year, so somehow we've got to try and recoup those costs.
Yeah, exactly. Different chemicals affect the body in different ways.
Nadhim Zahawi, I'll come back to him.
Look, instinctively, I'm against any... You tax it, then you penalise the poor, right? That's just hurts people, right? The reasons for childhood obesity are complex. It's partly genetic. Look at me, right? I don't eat much sugar, but I still get fat. Environmental... And, of course, education. I think I'm going to agree with Nigel.
Well, goodness me.
Right? That we need to educate people to understand what is in their food, let them make the choice. Don't tax them.
OK, no tax on sugar. The woman up there at the back, are you in favour of it?
I think it's shocking that there are certain foods that do have a lot of sugar in them, but then there's also a lot of foods that are marketed as more healthy but still have a lot. So do you think the manufacturers have something to answer for?
Alan Johnson.
Yes, it's not the only answer, but it's an answer. We need a sugar tax. Germaine, actually taxing cigarettes did help to bring down smoking. The percentage of the population who smoke now are at the lowest ever, and the price of cigarettes was a factor in that. Listen, this is not like some of the... This is deadly stuff. The British Medical Association, the Public Faculty of Health, the British Heart Foundation, Public Health England, who did this report, they all say, for the reasons Nigel said, you pick up a 14 spoonfuls of sugar, which is twice the recommended daily dose. We do this, incidentally, at our peril, because a future generation, if we don't do anything to do this, to deal with this, and education's part of it, of course, but a tax has been successful in the countries it's been introduced in, and we should introduce it.
And doesn't it only hurt the poorest, or does it hurt the poor
I don't buy this
more?
argument. Well, if that was the case,
well, I tell you why,
we'd have cheap fags.
No, but because of processed food.
Well, we do. We have black market cigarettes.
I
mean, we do.
No, the argument is that processed food has a lot of sugar, and it's quick to cook, and people who don't have the time to go and cook and buy fresh vegetables and all the things the middle classes are meant to do can't afford to, and they use stuff which has a lot of sugar without it being observable.
I don't buy that
Baked
argument.
beans, tomato soup.
I don't buy that argument. But if you tax sugar, then the producers of these goods will use less sugar. That's the only way. They've been told about the health risks for ages. It's been a voluntary system for ages.
All right.
They're doing nothing about it.
A brief point from you, the woman there in spectacles. Yes, quick one if you would.
Yeah. Manufactured products that use a lot of sugar make cheap food. The lower income can afford cheap food. Compare a packet of custard creams and a pound of apples. Which one is healthier? Which one is cheapest?
And what's the answer?
The custard creams are cheaper.
OK.
And will go further. And will perhaps satisfy for longer. So the poor have very little choice.
What's your view on taxing sugar, then?
I think it's one of a range of things that could be used, but on its own it will be insufficient. Education is important, but it's how you educate the public. Schools are not always the place to do it,
OK, fine.
etc.
Well, no doubt this debate's going on Twitter and texting, and in the debate that follows on 5 Live. But our hour's up on Question Time. Just to remind you, we're going to be in Edinburgh next week. We've got Labour's new leader in Scotland, Kezia Dugdale, on the panel. We've got Billy Bragg, the singer and campaigner, on the panel there. And the week after that, we're in North London. Now, the point about this is, if you can come to either Edinburgh or to Tottenham, apply by going on our website or call the number that's on the screen there, 0330 123 9988. And as I say, if you're listening on Radio 5 Live, the debate continues on Question Time Extra Time. My thanks to this panel, to all of you who came here to Grimsby tonight for this edition of Question Time. Until next Thursday, from all of us here, good night.
Politics and film mix with the man with the golden tongue, Andrew Neil, and guests Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo on This Week. Next.
put a spell on you, 'cause you're mine.